Welcome to Meeting the Inconceivable, a podcast exploring Zen koans, dreams, and the creative life produced by Pacific Zen Institute. Pacific Zen has a legacy of preserving and reimagining the koan tradition to meet our own times. With a lively community of artists, innovators, and seekers of all kinds that extends worldwide, our mission is to create a culture of transformation through meditation, koans, the arts, and conversations about the deepest matters. In this episode, Roshi John Tarrant tells the story of Deshan and his transformative pilgrimage of awakening. Once known as the king of the Diamond Sutra, as Deshan travels, he carries around his cart of books, all the words and commentaries of the ancient masters with which he cannot part. First, he meets a wise tea lady who cracks a hole in his mind of certainty before sending him to Great Dragon Pool along down the road for a pivotal encounter with the deep dark of night, underscoring how stepping into the dark with its thick uncertainty is far more alive in its mystery than any sort of fixed ideas. Tarrant shows how we're all Deshan, ready to let go our pile of old stories.
I'll start in a way I like to start this by reading a poem. Okay, so, and saying, I'm happy to be here. That's something to say. I think I'm happy to be meditating together in this temple together, really, this great imagined circle we have, people from Tokyo and Knoxville and Oregon and everywhere, Canada, Toronto. So, nice, San Barbara. This is Elizabeth Bishop, who's, this is some way to be inside the intensity of the world, I think. There's a poem of hers called Sandpiper. The roaring alongside he takes for granted, and that every so often the world is bound to shake. He runs to the south, finical, awkward, in a state of controlled panic, a student of Blake. Blake was an ecstatic poet. The beach hisses like fat. On his left, a sheet of interrupting water comes and goes and glazes over his dark and brittle feet. He runs straight through it, watching his toes, watching rather the spaces of sand between them, where, no detail too small, the Atlantic drains rapidly backwards and downwards. As he runs, he stares at the dragging grains. The world is a mist, and then the world is minute and vast and clear. The tide is higher or lower. He couldn't tell you which. His beak is focused, he is preoccupied, looking for something. Poor bird, he is obsessed. The millions of grands are black, white, tan, and grey, mixed with quartz grains, rose and amethyst. So, yeah, living right at the edge of the waves all the time, and the pounding. Kind of fun. How to be a sandpiper. So today I've been thinking of a couple of things that it feels to me a bit like, we've been in this tremendous sort of compression and holding, things being held down, and it's starting to move a little bit, not massively, but a bit, or at least from where I notice. And so then the question of, well, if we're not just still, what kind of journey we're on comes up, and how to be at home, whatever journey we're on, wherever we are, which is really the whole task of Zen. It's like how to really have the journey. What's it like to be on the journey we're on, And in a certain sense, to find the predicaments and impasses and dangers, to find them as part of the journey, and not something to be refused. And if we can possibly find the beauty in them, to find the beauty in them. So it's kind of obvious, but it's the thing we forget really, is to be here where I am, where we are in the journey. And so So I've been thinking about that, and I want to read another poem. This is another journey poem. This is Constantine Cavafy, and it's about one of the famous Western journeys is Odysseus's journey. He lost and wandering for 10 years through the Mediterranean and demons and deities. And this is called Ithaca, was where Odysseus was. He was the king of this small, poor island who was dragged away to war, conscripted with his men. And eventually, after 10 years, because of a trick, they won the war. And then he set off for home. As you set out for Ithaca, hope that the voyage is a long one, full of adventure, full of discovery. Lastrygonians and Cyclopses are very strange beings along the way. An angry Poseidon, the sea god who hates his guts. An angry Poseidon, don't be afraid of them. You'll never find things like that on your way. As long as you keep your thoughts raised high, as long as a rare excitement stirs your spirit and body. Lastrygonians and Cyclops, wild Poseidon, you won't encounter them unless you bring them along inside your soul, unless your soul sets them up in front of you, which of course our soul always does. The voyage is a long one. May there be many a summer morning when, with what pleasure, what joy, you come into harbours seen for the first time. May you stop at Phoenician trading stations to buy fine things. Mother of pearl and coral, amber and ebony, sensual perfume of every kind. As many sensual perfumes as you can, and may you visit many Egyptian cities to gather stores of knowledge from their scholars. Keep Ithaca always in your mind. Arriving there is what you are destined for. But do not hurry the journey at all. Better if it lasts for years. So you are old by the time you reach the island, wealthy with all you have gained on the way. Not expecting Ithaca to make you rich. Ithaca gave you the marvelous journey. Without her, you would not have set out. She has nothing left to give you now. And if you find her poor, Ithaca won't have fooled you. Wise as you will have become, so full of experience, you'll have understood by then what these Ithacas mean. There's something about the way that we keep thinking we're trying to get beyond where we are, but where we are is full of magic, even if it's painful or difficult or dangerous, because life is that way. That even if we're in the last 3 minutes of our lives, we're not going to try to get beyond it. So right now, we're always in the last minute of our life. This is it right now. Yeah, it's here. So I want to meditate, and we'll sit off, and then I'll give you what I think is a marvelous koan for the journey, okay? And the bell carries us deeper and deeper down through the thoughts and feelings without finding fault with anything, and a little bit before we had any problems, before we became who we are, and the sound. So at the beginning of meditation, just feel your life, feel the time. And you'll notice that to feel it is not to have opinions about. To feel what it's like is not to have opinions about what it's like. It's just to notice. And the simple thing about meditating is not really meditation. It's something alive, and the only thing necessary is not to distance ourselves from life by assessing and complaining and criticizing, by making it wrong, making ourselves wrong or other people wrong, which is fundamentally the same thing. We can feel how when the mind does it, it squeezes us down into a small, narrow cell, safety through imprisonment. So meditation is a kind of change of heart, but it's really more of forgetting to carry our burdens, really. And it's hard to forget something consciously, but we can do it. But we don't do it by trying to forget. We just do it by having a meditation and telling stories and koans. So here's one for today. Once upon a time, there was a person who really loved spirituality and meditation, and he was also very learned. He just loved reading and learning, and he was that little kid who I said, I know, at the back of the class, and he said that whether he knew or not. But he really did want to learn, so people taught him. And he had an unusually kind of good mind for retaining information. And so he just thought he could make his life by getting more and more information. And he decided to study the Buddhist sutras, which tell you how to get enlightened and how to be free and how to be kind to others and, the usual things. And he particularly liked one called the Diamond Sutra, which is a very condensed sutra. And so you can sort of memorize the whole thing without being a prodigy, although he was a kind of prodigy. And he got obsessed with this sutra. And it had a kind of history to it. In the Diamond Sutra, the sixth ancestor was a woodcutter who heard somebody chanting something from the sutra and became enlightened just with that. Suddenly realized, oh, it's all about that. And so there's a certain sort of a respect for that sutra. Although Zen says, the first ancestor was Bodhidharma, and he said, without regard to words or sutras, directly pointing to the human heart. So there's that other side of things, So he wrote about the Diamond Sutra, and he talked about the Diamond Sutra, and he became famous, and he argued about them, and he could out-argue anybody. And he had a big voice, and he was a big, vigorous person. He would intimidate people or just like keep arguing till everybody else gave up and went away. And so he became called the King of the Diamond Sutra. And the person who just can't, and that's that sort of person in our minds who just can't let go of like the thing they've got hold of. But usually when we're like that, there's some sort of uncertainty in us that we haven't noticed. So anyway, and for him, he heard that there were people in the South. He lived in China, far in the north, and he said there were people in the South who believed this whole other thing, that the Dharma Sutra wasn't important. In fact, he heard one of them called it the world's most boring sutra. and, and he thought, this is terrible. And they said, directly pointing to the human heart, without regard for words and sutras, to witness, to enter, to have the human heart. And so, and this sort of nagged him the way, sometimes you wake up in the middle of the night and you absolutely want to change something about the world, and you have very good reasons for it, and it's absolutely outrageous. And you're right, and all your friends know you're right. But still, it puts you in prison and in fire in the middle of the night. Well, he was like that. He was on fire. And he couldn't sleep properly. And he didn't really care about giving his lectures so much. He had to go and convert these people in the South, these demons in the South who believed these terrible things, or didn't believe the right things. And so he gathered all his, and he had written a great many texts, and there were too many to carry in a pack. So he got a hand cart with two wheels and reasonably light, and he loaded all his commentaries and books into the handcart. And there was a whole big pile of them in the handcart, and he set off, and it was 1,000 miles to go. And so, and he, stuff happened. It snowed, it rained. He set off in early spring, and he didn't get there till the end of summer, and things happened, and he heard rumors of war and the seasons changed, and he was, in a way, tormented or blessed by snow and rain and sleet and hot sunshine. And he saw the flowers breaking out in the roadsides, and along the riverbanks he saw the blossoms of the fruit trees. And his heart would open a bit, and then he'd think, onward, and he'd keep going. And he'd want to sort of rest in the meadows under the trees, but he'd think, onward, I have a mission. And he was very faithful to his mission. And he didn't really know what the South was, but he noticed the weather was getting warmer, and he was hot more than cold. And so, but he figured he had come quite a long way, and he hadn't really thought about what to do when he got there or who he'd talk to. He just knew that he would be able to change people's minds, And so he ran into this, he was hungry and thirsty, and people would give him money as a traveling monk on the way. So he had a tiny bit of money with him. And he ran into this woman who was selling like fried food, fast food by the roadside. It wasn't particularly fast, but it was, it was already cooked. So, and he came to her, and she had a little stall, and he went inside and sat down in the shade, and it was kind of really pleasant. And there's something about her that she had a funny kind of, she looked very old, but she looked sort of transparent in some way. So she didn't really look kind of like you expected someone old to look. She seemed very alive and but some enjoyable person. And so he sat down, he was just enjoying her presence, and then he said, well, I'd like some refreshments, I want something to eat and drink. And she said, oh, very good. And she said, so you're a traveling monk, huh? Oh, yeah. So what you got in your cart? And he said, oh, they're my commentaries. What are your commentaries on? They're on the Diamond Sutra. I can out-argue anyone on the Diamond Sutra. And she said, well, I'm interested. So happens that I'm interested in such matters. And so I'd like to ask you a question. And if you answer, how about we do a deal? If you answer, I'll give you free cakes and tea. And if you don't answer, I won't give you anything. And so I really felt, I don't know, what kind of business model is this? This whole conversation is starting to tip and get strange. And that's one of the signs they're in the realm of the old masters, So something strange is going on. He says, you can ask me anything on the Diamond Sutra. And so, yeah, so, and she says, well, it says in the Diamond Sutra, past mind cannot be grasped. Present mind cannot be grasped. Future mind cannot be grasped. Which mind do you plan to refresh? And this funny thing happened to him with sort of her resonant voice, or just her eyes, or the fact he'd just sort of never really thought about. In some way, he'd like become an expert on the sutra without really listening to it in some way, the way we do. And so he'd been on this long, long journey, and then suddenly it stopped, and it stopped there. And so and his mouth stopped, and he couldn't really say anything, and everything sort of turned over in his heart. But he didn't know what to do, which was kind of probably, his friends would have thought probably that's an improvement. So he didn't know what to do. But he wasn't completely dumb. And he said, well, is there a Zen teacher around here? And the obvious answer was, yes, you're talking to him. but she thought that she'd done, it was sort of one touch and then another was needed, and she'd given the first touch, I think. And that his journey hadn't quite completed itself at her tea stand. And she said, yes, there's Dragon Pool Temple is just up the road. You should visit Dragon Pool. And so he thanks her and goes off still hungry and thirsty and goes up the road, and there's a temple there, and it's a decent sized temple. It's got a big, impressive 3-story main gate, but they don't open the big gates just for all the time. There's a little gate inside the main gate, postern door, but there's a little gate there, and he bangs on the gate, and the gate opens, and an old gentleman looks out and says, "Yes." And he says, "I've come to see the dragon pool, but I can't see the lake, and there's no dragon here." And the old man says, "You have indeed come to the dragon pool," and invites him in. And it turns out it's the teacher. It's Dragon Pool himself has dressed in his old gardening clothes, has answered the gate. And so he he asks him to see the teacher, and yes, you're talking to the teacher. And so then they go into the Dragon Pool's quarters, and Mirror Bright Mountain is the name of the student, the Diamond King student. Anyway, and he comes to, and so but he has all these questions because he's a scholar and he's used to asking questions, having an answer and see this side and that side and why it's wrong and why, and compare it and believing in it, in the answer he comes to. And so, and you can just tell that this isn't happening here, but so he keeps asking question after question after question. And in the end, Dragonpool says, "Well, it's getting late. Time to go to bed." And the scholar says, "Oh, yeah, okay." And so he gets up, and there's a curtain across the door, and he opens the curtain, and he's met with darkness. The night has fallen. He hadn't even noticed. And so he turns back and says, "It's dark outside." And so everything starts to slow down for him. It's dark outside. And Dragonpool doesn't say anything. He just looks at him, and he twists some paper and lights it from a candle and hands him this paper twist to find his way to where he'll sleep. And the scholar takes this little improvised paper candle, and as soon as he takes it, Dragonpool blows it out. And then the scholar, just everything stops for the scholar, and his journey ends. His heart opens, and he just bows, and he says, "From now on, I won't doubt the words of an old teacher who's renowned everywhere under the sun." He's never heard of this guy, right? But he says, in fact, he fills the universe. Dragonpool's renown fills his heart, and he realizes he comes home, and he puts down the great burden of being right and arguing and everything. He puts down everything he's been carrying, and then goes to bed. And Dragonpool says, "Well, good night. See you in the morning." And then in the morning, there's an assembly, and the scholar brings out his handcart with all his books and all his commentaries, all the things he's written, his whole life work, I think he got his PhD for, and 2 PhDs for. And he tips them out in the ground, and he holds up a torch, and he sets fire to them, and he burns them. And he says, "Even if you have exhausted the abstruse doctrines, it's like placing a hair in vast space. And to exhaust the essential workings of the world is like putting a single drop of water into a great valley." And he burned them all. And then what he did was, his personality hadn't changed that much, because he just left. He just walked out and went on talk. He kept walking. His journey kept going, but it was a different journey, and his heart had changed. So that was his journey. And he And he went on, and he'd go and listen to talks, and he'd ask people questions again. And later on, he became a famous teacher. But at this stage, he'd become, in a way, he'd put down everything, and he'd become empty. And in a way, he was no longer a victim of his own mind. And he was walking, when he walked along the roads, he was walking before he thought about things. And he just saw the trees coming by him, just heard the streams, tasted the dust. It was cold in winter, warm in summer. And he was walking through the vastness. So I'll stop there and just see whatever part of this koan touches your heart, the story. The can is dark outside, and he hands the can, gets a candle, and the candle is blown out. And he says, "From now on, I will not doubt the words of an old teacher, renowned everywhere under the sun." So we'll just sit with this. Each meditation is a journey from the far north to the far south. We have to be patient with the weather, and then not think there's anything wrong with being on this journey. The journey is somehow to just accept without having to even think about it. The journey itself is home. This life itself is home, with its dangers and restlessness and beauty and tenderness. From now on, I will not doubt the words of an old master renowned everywhere under the sun. Well, thank you. Nice to sit. There's a Taoist saying of the true traveler has no fixed destination, no set time of arrival. But it's really about how, we're here. Where are we? Here. So it's really about that. If you're wondering where you are, you're here. And where will you be tomorrow? Here. So it's like that. But there's a way in which we need the journey. I think Kavafi's Ithaca poem is about this. We need the journey in order to, somehow it transforms us. It's not that it gets us to the destination, because the destination will have changed by the time we got there. And as everybody knows. And so now I've been thinking about journeys, and I was thinking about, I first became deeply interested in meditation without really knowing why, and I thought my mind was, could use a bit of help. And you know, it seemed like I had thoughts that, like many people, I noticed that I had thoughts that I hadn't invited in, and sometimes they seemed to be constricting me and mainly not fully entering my life, I think, And also, at some stage, noticed my opinions were doing the same thing, and my views of many kinds. And so, when Buddhism talks about, what we really suffer from is views. I have a position on this. Well, I'm sorry to hear it. I have a position on my life, my childhood, on you, on the people I interact with, on pretty much everything. And it's not that we can't, we don't know who we want to vote for, or something like that. You're probably very clear about that. But in a way, that's not the problem. I think we know the problem is the way we constrain ourselves. It's our certainty and vehemence that it's through that we know who we are, the way Deshan was the name of the Diamond Sutra scholar. And he became, kind of legendary and strange. And the problem was, it wasn't that he was interested in the Diamond Sutra, it was that he used it to think that's who he was, And in a way, that's what our views do. They tell us who we are. But that's much more constricting than not knowing. And there's kind of inside the journey, there's a kind of tenderness. When we start on the journey, well, then it'll be okay then, you know. And so that's what a practice is. If you're practicing, even just showing up, one of the great old Japanese teachers said, just, one period of meditation wipes away all your crimes, all the bad thoughts you've ever had, that kind of thing. And then you can start again, have some more thoughts that you can wipe away. So, but it does that. And I remember when I first came to meditation, the two things that are odd for me is that when I heard about meditation, I kind of didn't know what it was, but I knew I wanted to do it. And I told this story to some friends yesterday, a couple of whom are on here, so bear with me. But I was working in publishing and some minor editing kind of work. And then I ran on a street corner downtown, this in a city in Australia. I ran into this other woman whom I knew slightly, and she's an amiable, interesting, intelligent person. And we stopped to chat on like street corner, and she mentioned that she was planning to do some Tibetan teachers were coming to town. There'd never been any Buddhist teachers in Australia that I'd ever heard of, and so. But that didn't really mean anything to me in itself because I didn't know what Buddhism was or Tibetans were or anything like that too. And I immediately said to her, well, how do I get hold of them? And she just looked at me and she immediately knew what was going on. She said, you can go, but you won't, if you do, you won't come back. And in fact, I never came back. Here I am. I'm still with those Tibetans. And it's sort of rather wonderful that she could see that, and something in me knew. And I went along to the retreat. It was a month-long silent retreat, and I didn't know anything about silence and retreats, meditation. And they told us to bring a cushion, which I didn't even know why, So I bought a cushion. I had a cushion on my sofa that was filled with little pieces of foam, and it was like all squishy like that. And it was and there was nothing to sit on at the retreat except what you brought. So it was great. So I would wrap this up and and the Tibetans had a thing about you're not supposed to sit on books because they're sacred, but I would wrap the books up things so that you couldn't see what they were and then sit on the books. It was kind of fun. So anyway, so I feel for Deshan's cluelessness when he set off. It's kind of nice. I'm going to convert those. I didn't know what I was doing. And then eventually I ended up realizing I could go and study deeper and study koans and meditating. And there's something nice about, being on the path. And I'd keep trying to have some sort of breakthrough like Deshan had. And it was over and over again, I'd try to have it. And I'd go into these retreats, 7-day retreats, and try to not have a single stray thought and things like that. And gradually I realized that kind of stray thoughts on me, and also in a way, sometimes my mind would get very clear, but didn't not seem nice, but another thing among things. But then I noticed that somehow I was being nourished by the world in a way I hadn't noticed. And so the journey itself starts to change you before you get to the goal. And I think that's the thing I want to say, that right now we're all in that journey that's changing us and transforming us, it's changing our hearts and making them more tender. What I noticed was I had a real tenderness for people and things, that I'd come out of a pretty tough world in Australia, fishing and fishing boats and then political activism for land rights and things, and not notably fluffy people. so it was kind of good for me to be tender, it was kind of exciting actually. So that's what I want to say there about the journey opens our hearts in some way. And after a while, we don't long to be at the end of the journey. It's all right to be in what we're doing. If we're helping people, we're helping people. If we're risking our lives, we're risking our lives, and it's all right. And in a way, what a beautiful thing to be doing. And if we're unable to offer or give much, then we have to bear that. And then that's got to be all right, then we can, in a way, use this time to deepen our practice and open our hearts. So that's what I'm kind of I'm thinking. Here's a nice it's a nice little poem about. There's another Kavafi poem, and it's about well, what's it about? It's really about how we're here now. The rest I will tell to those down in Hades, down in the underworld. Indeed, said the proconsul, who's this vast, like, viceroy general sort of person. Indeed, said the proconsul, closing the book, this line is beautiful and very true. Sophocles wrote it in a deeply philosophic mood. How much we'll tell down there, how much, and how very different will appear. What we protect here, like sleepless guards, wounds and secrets locked inside us, protect with such great anxiety day after day, will reveal freely and clearly down there. So you can see how, he can tell, this character in Kavafi's poem, he can tell that in some way how we protect ourselves confines us, makes us suffer, He can tell that. So then he imagines there'll be a place after we die, then we'll be able to be candid. Then we'll be able to open our hearts. What we protect with such great anxiety day after day will reveal freely and clearly down there. You might add, said the sophist, half smiling, if they talk about things like that down there, if they bother about them at all anymore. That's the emptiness, what Zen would call the emptiness point of view. That it's all founded on, there's no foundation, and we don't need a foundation. We just take a step without having to know who we are. And even our secrets and shames tell us who we are, and we hold on to them like that. So there's a kind of possibility of freedom, and the journey itself transforms us. Yeah. So let me stop there, and I want to hear from a couple of people if they have anything to say. Tess, anything you would like to say?
Sure. Thank you for the beautiful poems. The two images that kind of grabbed me this morning was one, the kind of flammability of any kind of certainty, and how when that goes out, I was just noticing in my body how my attention goes from sort of following this little piece of certainty to all of a sudden kind of this whole world of senses and expansing kind of comes into awareness. And this weekend, we've been trying to sell our house for about 3 years, and the market has been abysmal. And there's now this mass exodus out of New York City, and all these people kind of clamoring at our house. And what seemed like the right thing and the needed thing and the good thing now feels like this very scary thing and uncertain thing. And so the koan feels very alive in the sense that there's no clear way of what to do in this strange time where there's no way of knowing how it's going to go. And will this be the only chance that the market's good? But it's scary because all the other houses are leaving. And so it's just this kind of, the only way is to sort of blow out the candle and feel our way through. So that's, it kind of feels beyond this little house, just sort of how everything is a little right now. So
Sounds like scary and exhilarating and all that. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Sarah Bender, did you want to say anything?
Lots of associations are coming up. One was actually with a novel I just finished reading that some of you may have read also, A Gentleman in Moscow, in quite a different context, but very much this sense he finds himself a prisoner confined to a hotel rather than being sent to prison, to an elegant old hotel where he's been living already, but now he can't leave the hotel, and he's not able to leave the hotel for decades. But his attitude immediately when this happens is, oh, I can work with this. And so the novel is really about all the different amazing things that happen to him while still in the hotel for decades. And So it's very much that sense of the journey being itself in the way he meets it, with that kind of spirit, with that kind of openness. The awful things and the very cool things all are wondrous. So that association. And so then I realized, I woke up this morning with kind of a nightmare, but it was a journey nightmare. So this is kind of like exactly that, in a car on a crossing the plains, knowing kind of where I was going to meet some beloved other, either my brother or my son or somebody like that. And then finding myself pulling off into, but not knowing the way, pulling off into a small town and starting to park in the suburbs, but realizing that that sort of wasn't going to work, and going all the way into the town and just barely making it as my vision gets dimmer and dimmer and I get less and less able to open my eyes. I'm in a small parking lot and parked there and unable to see at all. And some kind of rough young people in a van come, and I don't know their intentions. They might be going to steal things out of the back of my car, but actually they put plants in there. And then out of nowhere appears my good friend in the morning, and I realize I need to water all those plants. So I use all the water in the car to water the plants. And then she says, "No problem. I have some ice." And I put the ice on my eyes, and then my eyes will open again. So the dream just had to me so much the feeling of this journey in our meditation. So that was just kind of amazing.
I like that shadow thing too. Like these rough-looking kids come and they're really dangerous. They put plants in your car. If I heard that correctly, yeah, it's rather wonderful. It's like the thing we feared turns out to be putting plants in our car. There's a couple more people. Dave Weinstein, do you have anything encouraging to say?
Yeah, I will try to be encouraging. The part of the story that lit up for me was that part where he says, "I will no longer doubt the words of this old teacher renowned far and wide," which, like, well, who is he talking about? Because he just met Dragon Pond and he never heard of him. So he must be talking about himself, I realized, and how part of awakening and dropping all of our stories that we have about ourselves is in our heart opening. Is getting in touch with that fact that the old teacher, renowned far and wide, is us, and we can trust that. How the beginning of that journey was, I imagine, fueled by some way that he had this mistrust about something that drove him that 1,000 miles. How, if you could just stay with the journey and the difficulties of it, you realize, that teacher that I'm looking for is right here.
Thank you. Allison, did you want to say anything?
Yes. I'm very much with Deshan in the moment when he's walked through all of China and he is hungry and thirsty and he sees this little tea shop and he lets go of his cart and he turns to go into the tea shop. So in some way he's already, in order to find the refreshments, he has to leave his cart of all the things he's brought with him to protect himself, like all his whole identity. And that's such a promising moment, and the refreshment being offered. And lately, so much of this time for me is feeling how I'm dragging my cart of all the things I'm hoping will get me through this time. And yet my life keeps offering me, like, there's little tea shops everywhere. And I was thinking how I was making marmalade the other day, and we have this Meyer lemon tree, which is just loaded with ripe Meyer lemons and also a halo of blossoms right now. So I went out there and I have to go underneath and sort of into the the Meyer lemon, and it's like going into the tea shop looking for the ripe lemons, and already just the offering I've left, I'm no longer holding it. I'm I'm tasting the tea and drinking, eating the refreshments and the cakes. And just how this just happens over and over again. I go back to the bourbon, and life keeps offering me the tea. That's it.
Right, thanks. Tea shops. Frag. The tea seller she's an archetype, that woman in China, the person who, she's the Yoda figure of the old Zen stories. She like flips people on their heads, She always, people come along with a lot of kind of importance, and she takes it away, and she recurs in quite a number of stories. Michelle Riddle, anything you want to say?
I kind of want to share just the experience I had. I don't know if it's just this was my experience. So we were sitting in meditation there, or I was listening to the talk and feeling a little bit restless. My mind was very busy, but it was like pleasant, like happy, like I was anticipating things. And then we were sitting quietly, and all of a sudden, like I just went from this really restless, busy mind to really quiet and really feeling like I was in the meditation. And then I became a little bit aware of an image of it was like The Exorcist, like this demon inside, like wanting to scream in anger, and it was, like, completely out of nowhere, like, made no sense to me, it's like I couldn't quite feel it, but it was there, and then you read that poem about, maybe when we get to hell, we will express all this, and it was just I don't know what to make of any of that, but it was an interesting little journey that I went on, so thanks.
Sometimes the demons want to be included too on the journey. It's like they're very interested in coming along.
I guess it's like, I'm interested what's gonna happen, oh, okay.
Well, one of the things about this story that sort of struck me is that secretly he wanted that moment when the candle blew out and everything stopped for him. And so, but what led him off? In other words, bad motives are often a good reason to practice. So, he wanted to convince people, and so the demons kind of do come along, I think, and his demon was obviously being right, and arguing with people and things like that. So, and maybe it's nothing to do with you; it's just his demon, Michelle. So I want to sit a bit more, and okay, so just feel it, and just with the comments, I'm asking teachers for their comments just because, so we just get a richer field, and I'd like to ask everyone, but of course we can't do that because there's too many of us. But thank you for your patience with that, and thank you for your generosity in sharing what's in your hearts as we've just spoken. So, and if you notice, there's no need to go back where we were in the last meditation. We just turn into the here-ness of here. You notice if the mind compares and says this is better or this is worse, or, you just turn into that. And then the freedom's in there. Past mind cannot be grasped. Present mind cannot be grasped. Future mind cannot be grasped. Which mind would you like to refresh? It's dark outside. There's dark inside, too. From now on, I will not doubt the words of an old teacher renowned everywhere under the sun. I want to read this is a Chinese poem by Li Bai, written about 725. So it's older than we are. and it's really just a thanks to our musicians, thanks to Jordan and also to Amaryllis. The monk from Shu is out in Sichuan, out in the wilderness, carrying his lute called green damask. They used to give names to their guitars and lutes and things. And there was a famous one called Green Damask. Carrying his lute, Green Damask, descends in the west from the bright peak. The moment his hands begin to play across the strings, it's like hearing the wind in 10,000 pines in the valley. The traveler's mind is washed in flowing water. Lingering echoes sound in the bells and the frost. Unnoticed, evening has come to the green mountains. The clouds of autumn, how many layers of darkness. So there's something nice about part of the journey is to listen and, sit in the green glade and hear a lute, hear a guitar or a violin. And it's one of the great precious things in life. And why I think the old teachers like to have somebody play during a retreat in a zendo when people are deep in meditation, because it's not necessary to make a comment about it. It just goes straight to the heart. All the tenderness and beauty is there. The last thing I want to say, I think, today is about that when we have to set out on the journey, and we're already on it, and the journey lasts our whole life, could be worse. And it seems if we have a task, the task of practice is just not to refuse life, is to welcome our lives. And that life, you are right. That old poetic saying of Rilke's, life, you are right, And the whole of life is right, the hard bits as well as the beautiful bits. And then we hear the lute called Green Brocade. we hear the music, and it's a beautiful thing. We're lucky to hear the music. So we can rest there.
To support these episodes or learn more about upcoming programs and retreats at Pacific Zen Institute, visit us at pacificzen.org. You'll find details on John Tarrant's Sunday talks, our Open Temple morning meditation, and our Zen Luminaries series featuring intimate conversations with scholars, poets, and teachers of Koan Zen. Thanks for listening.